Hello, I hope you all are doing so well. I decided to do this video live. I was going to record it, but I figured it's kind of an intense energy and I would probably keep stopping and eventually never finish this. This week I've been talking about, well, this is the way it wants to come through, right? The validity of our shame. And that word is actually, it can kind of be a very scary word. And it was something that I've recently discovered the power, though, that lies behind or beneath our shame, because really our wounds and the shame that is around them enshrouds the truth of who we are, the gifts that we wanted to bring into this lifetime to share with the world. So I had an experience last week where the check engine light went off on my car, and I started to feel a bit anxious about it. I wasn't overly concerned because it's happened before, and sometimes it's just a leak in the system, whatever. And I already had an appointment scheduled for the week after, but just the fear of not knowing what was really going on was causing me a lot of stress and anxiety. So I thought, okay, I'm going to take it to the auto parts store and have them scan it. And what I realized as I was watching this was that, well, as I was looking, right, and they said free test, and I thought, wait a second, this is something that they offer and they advertise. I'm not the only one that has a check engine light go on, and that this is a thing that just happens. And as I was looking at this and realizing this, I was having this internal realization that what I was really feeling around seeing this light on my dashboard, right, was that I was feeling shame about the fact that there was something wrong with my car. And I had to sit with it for a little bit because I had never recognized this in myself before. And I started to realize the way that I responded to life was actually from a place of shame. What I would have done, right, is to go in and panic and try to maybe even feel like I needed to make excuses for why this was happening, to try to protect myself, right? So there's a sense of the shame when it gets activated. There is this internal sense of vulnerability. And when our shame is activated, it can come out in so many different ways, right? We can be angry, we can be cold, we can shut down, just unlimited ways that gets expressed. But what I realized was that I've really been living from a place of shame, even though I have felt that I'm in control, I'm making choices. My response to things that happen to me are actually quite shame-filled. And so we have this level of internalized shame that I believe we probably all live with and may not fully recognize. And really the key to it is going back to our childhood. Now, of course, there can be things, it's really hard to discern sometimes what is what. And of course, even if we have things that we feel we can't quite relate to this life, right? Even if it came from, let's say, a past life or from somewhere beyond, right? It feels like it happened somewhere else. We are going to have the experience of it, that similar template of it in childhood. So childhood is always a really wonderful place to figure these things out. And even if we can't remember the specific event, there is this kind of impression that the energy will leave, right? So one of the ways I really started to understand this for myself was just to make myself kind of sit in the energy of what it was like to be a child when I was feeling shut down. My environment growing up was very, very controlled. It was highly controlled, but I didn't really realize it at the time until much later. But what I did was kind of sit and feel, because this is the feeling I would always have. I've talked about this a lot. Like I feel this sense of fog or like a barrier or just confusion, right? And I realized this is really the shame, because my experience in childhood was often that when I would start to express, and I was often told I was too loud, too exuberant, right? I was either directly or indirectly shut down. So I kind of put myself, okay, so what was I feeling when this was happening? And it was like I was looking down. I didn't want to look at the person that was there. And I realized it was like this not, even though a lot of times it was verbally communicated, there was also a lot of it that was so nonverbal, right? Picking up on those cues that someone is upset. There's an element of disgust or disapproval or contempt that I was even feeling. But I did not realize the level to which I felt so incredibly controlled by this. So, again, whether it comes from, it does source from childhood. So it's neither here nor there, right, in the past, but it is about how we feel it now, how we are experiencing it now, how it is really controlling our life now. And one of the things that is so helpful, right, is to start to get a sense of what that shame feels like or felt like as a child, so that we can understand where this is playing out. We can feel that now in our lives, right? So one of the things that I have found so helpful, and for a lot of people too, we can actually channel your energy field. And this is what I've seen over and over again when I have done this for individuals, is that most times they have a sense of these things, and yet what they really need is that validation, right? Because what is really happening with the shame is that we are enmeshed with our shame, and this becomes who we believe we are, and we don't know any different because it's been with us for so long. There's this concept of separation, that we are separated from source. And really, my feeling on it is that actually we are connected to source, right? But we can't feel it because the shame creates this shroud around it, right? And we identify as this source that has been enmeshed with our own shame. So part of, channeling the energy field and seeing what's really going on in order to give this validation is to identify that piece that is really has been, let's say, shamed into us, right? These feelings that we have under the surface all the time. And again, it can come out in many different ways. One of the things that I started to realize is like the way that I talk to myself, right? I learned after being oppressed for so long that nothing I wanted, none of my needs were really important, right? And that comes from the shame in the adults and the caregivers that were around me that didn't know how to provide or didn't know how to provide for their own needs, right? And so it was really seen as a sense of, even if you have needs, we don't know how to deal with it. We don't know how to handle it. Therefore, it was totally invalidated. So this sense of worth, really, I had none. It came from, my sense of worth came from not being myself and being this shamed being then. And part of what makes this so challenging, of course, is that we have had this whole time. And yet, what is so brilliant about the shame, right, is that what it has done is truly cover up who we are. So if we can allow ourselves to come a little bit closer here, right? I think one of the problems too is that even if we have some recognition, there's the feeling of, what do we do with it then? Where do we go with all of this? So even if we uncover it, right? Even if we understand that wound, where do we go? But if we can understand that beneath that wound, beneath the shame, once we start to unwrap the shame, once we start to peel that back and understand that's not actually who we are, that is where our greatest source power is, right? It's who we truly are. It's what we truly wanted to bring into this life. And it is incredibly painful, but these are the things that we wanted to share with the world, right? And so there's this idea or this question of like, why is it so painful? It's painful because we are avoiding it, but we're avoiding it because we don't even know it's there, right? Again, we just think this is who we are, but we develop a sense of this negative self-talk. again, many different ways, right? For me, the way it kind of tends to play out is that because of that sense of isolation, right, I learned I could only rely on myself. I became incredibly independent. It was also very lonely, but I developed a set of skills and abilities to get through anything, right? This resilience, um, which I had a lot of pride in, right? That I could solve any problem, I could find the answers, I could get things done. It became one of my identities, right? My personality, part of my personality that I took such pride in. And yet it was really keeping me, right? It was shame. It was shame at work telling me, you've got to keep going. You've got to work harder. Whatever it is, you'll figure it out. Just get through this kind of drive, right? Which eventually we know burns us out and we can't sustain that. So it's painful because we are avoiding looking at it. We're avoiding looking at it because we don't know it's there. Once we understand that it's there, what we need to know is that when we start to release this, so we get that sense of separation from it, and then we start to see how this has played out on a near constant basis in our lives, we see what it has really been suppressing, right? And that's when the sense of freedom really starts to come through and we really start to experience a different kind of life here. And it's really hard for the brain because with shame, it's really complex. It's like it's in us, it becomes a part of our identity and how we operate in the world, and yet we didn't create it, but we feel like we did. We feel like we are it, right? So it's really hard to, again, find that point of separation. But once we do, this is really where our ultimate freedom lies. And then this is the point where we start to recognize our wounds actually do make us stronger. It's not the event of the wound, right? But being that we are on this planet Earth and this is the way things are, right? This was what it means, what happens when we are born into a human body. This is how it goes. It's part of the gig, right? So we can use that as a way to uncover our ultimate truth. We always often say, like, what am I doing here? What is my soul's purpose? It's really, really challenging because we're also trying to figure that out through this filter of the shame, right? But really getting to the root of this and feeling it and allowing ourselves not to feel shame about the shame, right? And this is where we start to understand, okay, well, because I was shamed by someone who, that's the only way it happens, right? Shame begets shame. And this is why we have this locking down in the system. So once we start to see that and understand it, we have more compassion for ourselves. We have compassion for those who came before us. And this is how we start to undo this enmeshment, which is really what the matrix system is, right? It is this distortion. It is held together by shame. One of the things we also start to notice once we identify the shame is that we're not really having anxiety. We're not really having panic attacks. Now, I'm not saying that those things don't happen, right? They do. They are caused. They are a very real thing. But at the root of those things is where we are in a space of shame. Because I had this experience this morning where I was thinking, like, okay, I don't have the dollars in my bank account, right? And I went into like, oh my God, what am I going to do? But I could feel like shame. This is who I am. What does this say about me? What does this have to do with my identity, right? It's like, actually, it has nothing to do with it, but it's how we have learned to move through this life. Yeah, there's a big heart activation coming in with this. So one of the things that we can do, again, is really channel the energy field to find that separation for you, right? So that you can feel the difference. Once you get a taste of that, once you get that gap and that validation, it can really start to unravel so much of this distortion for you. And then again, I'm doing the Saturday soul reorientation, right? Which again is really to help the human and the energy field make peace with this, right? It's not anyone's fault. And yet, when we can take responsibility for the way that we are expressing our own shame in our own life and terrorizing ourselves with it, that's when we start to end the cycles. Because it's really not until we see it from this perspective that all this other stuff starts to fall away. I spent so many years trying to figure out what was wrong with me, right? Therapy, learning about the nervous system, trying to figure out how do I say this so I don't trigger the other person? How do I not be triggered by what the other person is saying? How do I micromanage this stuff inside, right? And yeah, it's easier when you remove yourself from triggering situations, and yet it can also become very isolating. And we are not meant to be in isolation. We are meant to be connected. And we're trying our best to find ways to be connected within shame. And it isn't working. In fact, this is what we're seeing. It's getting harder and harder and harder because of the level of energy that's coming in. We cannot sustain being in these states anymore. So what I have found, because I worked very hard, spent a lot of time, okay, when this person says this, this is what triggered it. This is how I get triggered, right? So I have to make sure it caused so much stress and so much blockage actually in the energy field. This is where I have learned, okay, I actually have to drop out of that, come into the energy field. And that's when I started to really experience the truth of what was happening, which is that it was all of this enshrouding, right? So as I am starting to allow, now these are very, very painful feelings, right? They feel like I am going to die. And it feels like, for me, especially in childhood, it was, I could not ask. Like there was this fear, right, of asking for what I needed. And I still feel it today. And I'm having to work on actually, it's not about setting up the situation so it feels safe to ask for what I need. It is actually breaking through that barrier, right? Because the truth is that it is safe to ask for what I need. It's the fear that it will be rejected. And yet again, if I know who I truly am and all of this, and I know where that original challenge of having to ask for what I needed comes from, I'm not self-identifying through that rejection then, right? So I understand how it was formulated and how it got to be inside of my body, and I don't have to identify with that entrapment of it anymore. And I can learn, right? There are safe places and safe people to get this out, right? To ask for what it is. And this is where, again, it's this sense of freedom, right? I go to this, it's a 12-step program, right, for Codependence Anonymous that I recently started going to. And I love 12-step programs. And they're really wonderful up into a point, I think, right? Which is with everything in this world. Again, we have tried our best to manage and to maneuver in the level of trauma and distortion that's here. But of course, the issue of boundaries always comes up, right? And I was thinking, I was listening to someone else talk about a situation that they had and how they made a boundary, right? And they felt so good about it. And so I was thinking, I had this situation occur where I felt very shut out, very almost betrayed, right? And so I realized, okay, I feel triggered, I feel unsafe, and I feel hurt. And so how do I deal with this? And so my thought was, okay, well, what is my boundary in this situation? My boundary is, if you're going to do this, then I need this before this is going to continue, right? But as I was thinking it in my head, what I saw was, okay, here's my boundary, right? Often they'll talk about boundaries as being fences. And I realized this boundary was keeping my wound safe, right? Because what I was really reacting to was the feeling that what this person said created inside of me. And it wasn't related to the truth that I was even feeling, right? They were just saying what was true for them. It was triggering something inside of me. So in response to it, this is what we're kind of told, like, have your boundaries, know what they are. And yet when we're trying to set boundaries in these situations, these are often reactions to things, right? It's not a boundary that I was like, okay, before I get into this situation or before I get into a relationship or these are my primal kind of needs, right? That is like authentic, organic boundary setting because it comes from a place of coming internal, not in response to something that is out there telling me whatever. And then I feel I have to protect myself, right? So that's a different kind of boundary. But I think for the most part, what most of us are trying to do when we are already in situations that are triggering, right? It's coming from a bit of a disturbed place. It's not totally clear. And what we are doing is trying to protect the wounding, right? So, as we continue to dig deeper, right, it is inner union. Yes, it is learning to make peace inside of ourselves with not only our energy field and our human, but unweaving ourselves, right, unbecoming this enmeshment of our wounds that was locked in by the shame. And then once we've started this process, right, we have to go out and we have to relate with other people. And this is where we're at right now. It's happening inside of us, but it is happening in connection to in conjunction with these connections that we have right now. So there's a lot that's getting triggered. I'm seeing this in the union fields, right? There's a lot of that old karmic kind of entrapment in relationships that might be resurfacing to be looked at. But the gift of this energy, there is an extreme level of pressure that is happening in order to kind of push this stuff out of the field, right? To really get it expressed out. And it's really, really intense. And yet again, it's like, this is where the freedom lies, beneath the surface, as we come deeper and deeper and deeper and really feel the truth of the energy and the truth of the freedom. So, so I'm just going to do a bit of energy work around this. Oh yeah, just as I'm reading your comments here, thank you so much. That was one of the things that really made me aware, right? Like when this was happening, when this person was saying these things, when I'm encountering these things, I'm recognizing they are not coddling my wounds. And that was scary as hell. And that's how we've been working. That's how we've been moving through life, right? Is it safe? It's coddling my wound. Okay, it's safe to go here. It's like people will say, oh, follow your intuition. And yet, is it really our intuition that we're connecting to in these ways? So that's a really, really huge realization. So just coming into, this is beneath the solar plexus. It's really in the hips and the lower back that I'm feeling this here. Yeah, and it's a panic about being in my own space totally and completely, right? If I really trust what I am feeling, am I going to be safe? Well, if that isn't everything we were conditioned not to think in childhood, right? The only way we were able to stay safe was to ignore what we were truly feeling. There's a lot of aching here. Wow. Feeling this in the heart too. And okay, it's important to say this out loud, right? What we feel at the core is really betrayal. And we can feel this, right? How we even feel betrayed by source because we are struggling. And yet again, it's not source. Source has always been here. It's this really almost like we got speared right at the most potent parts of ourselves with this shame. That's the separation that we're feeling. That's the lockdown that we're feeling. And then all these things that evolved as a result of it, the way that we talk to ourselves, the way that we relate to others, it becomes this system. It's so based in the shame. And this is why I say this is the father. It fathers, right? It holds the space for the wounds, the shame. It's, and this is the hardest work we will ever do. And it reminds me of that too, where they say, you know, where are we going to hide the key? It's like, we'll hide it on the inside because they'll never go to look there. And it is true, right? Because we have these emotions. We're afraid of the emotions. We don't know what they mean. Where is this bringing us? It's always bringing us to the root of who we are, which is the most beautiful and secure place we will ever find. And if we look at what's going on in the world today, right, this is what is occurring. It's really the perfect opportunity. And this is what people are being pushed to do, right? Where do you derive a sense of security? Is it external to you? Or can you connect into your source and feel your source fully? Okay, let's pivot the fields. I have just a few minutes here. Yeah, okay, because yes, because shame does, it's just like our nervous system being triggered, right? That prefrontal cortex shuts down and we can't think. We go into this state of fight or flight. So this is why it's important to identify these things outside of that triggered state, right? So a lot of these systems, especially when we talk about relationships, right? When they say, okay, set up a safe way to communicate. And yes, you can have that established system. And yet the problem is when you get triggered, that is not going to work. So we have to understand the actual trigger in order to start to dismantle it in our own brains before we come in contact so that as we feel that feeling rising, right, we can recognize, okay, this is what this is now, and this is where I need to start to be more vulnerable in order to release through this, in order to break through this. So we're gonna, let's pivot because we need to come in the back side here. It's very tense. There feel to be nerves here. I can feel it in the base of the head here too, the brain. So let's start to release through the spine and up through all the way at the top of the neck here. Top of the spine. Good. Yeah, Jono Koshai. That it's like a bit of a tilt. Koshai Chokoya. That burden of shame. Wow, I can feel that. It's like it does almost create a bit of a crease, right? Right at the heart. So it's like the flow gets blocked. But that also we see that, right? When people have heavy shame, it's like this posture, we look down, like this is what this is, right? It is like we see it manifest in the body. I don't mean to laugh, but like I just saw it in the energy field, right? There's like a cutting off at the heart space where normally we would want to see it like this and it goes like this. And that's actually the posture that the body will take on. So, oh yeah, because we're not rooted in our own root, right? Like in the base of the spine here. Okay. Good. Okay, so there's a range in the base of the spine that matches something in the base of the head here. Let's just come in here. sense of identity. What I base my sense of worth on. Wow, big shifts here. Oh, this is so good. Yeah, this is feeling really good. Really good activations, clearing through the base of the spine. Yeah, that womb space too. Okay, so just a reminder, if you're interested, on Saturday, I'm going to be doing a live Zoom session around all of this to continue to not as much work with the shame as reorient our understanding and our perspective as we're mining our powers, right, up from underneath all of this. So really kind of flipping the script on how we've been understanding this. So that's this coming Saturday. And then again, too, if you're interested, I do personal channel messages, right, which we can do to help you start to get a sense of separation in your field. All of that can be found on my website. All right, that's where I'm going to leave this today. Thank you so much for being here. I hope you have a wonderful, wonderful rest of your day. Take good care.